Good morning and welcome to this formal meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. Apologies for a slightly late start owing to what I understand is an IT glitch. I'm Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of this committee. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website. And with this in mind, I would like to welcome members of the public watching this live. Is that the case? If not, it's being recorded.
We are recording.
Sure, thank you. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I'd like to begin with the health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we will need to leave the council chamber, through the rear doors, and leave the building through the reception into the front car park, where we will wait until further instructions are issued. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting. If you wish to ask a question at any point, can you please raise your hand? Can also remind members of the committee to switch your microphone when invited to speak on and speak close to the microphone and switch it off when finished. Requests to speak will be collated by my scrutiny officer to my left, Kiara. We will now move to the formal agenda. Agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence, replacement councillors. Trina, are you able to report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Mrs Clark, Councillor Key, Councillor Stokes and Councillor King. But can I also say Councillor King has another meeting. She's going to try and join the meeting to observe via Teams later. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. Item 2 of the agenda is declarations of councillor interests. Do any members wish to declare any interests? Okay. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting of the Public Protection Community Scrutiny Committee held on the 25th of January. You'll note that there's a supplementary agenda to what was originally published, and I'll go through those, but this item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. I'd like to point out the agenda pack has been updated since its circulation with the relevant minutes you should have with you today. A notification was sent to all members of this committee yesterday. Assuming you've all got the new minutes, shout out now if you haven't. Yeah. Do I have a proposer that's the correct record of those minutes, please? Okay. And a seconder. Okay. Councillor Dunning, thank you. I feel no need to go through them page by page. If you've got anything, shout out, please. Thank you. That's those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record, and I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Item 4 of the agenda, announcements by the chairman, executive councillors and lead officers. We do have a thinner agenda this morning. Nevertheless, I'd like to ask officers to only summarise the key points of their reports and also to remind members of the importance of succinct and concise questions and comments. You may be aware of the announcement made by the Chief Executive last week that leadership for public protection is being transferred as a function from Resources and Andrew Crookham to Glenn Garrard, Executive Director for Adult Care and Community Wellbeing, from the 1st of April. However, that is not the only change, as we'll also be waving farewell to Di Colson as she returns to her substantive role in the police on the 31st of March. On behalf of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee members, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Di for her hard work and support in this role during the past 2 years, and to say that you will be dearly missed. Martin Parker has been appointed as the new Assistant Director for Public Protection and will also be joining us from Lincolnshire Police. Once again, on behalf of this committee, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Martin. He'll be joining us from the next meeting onwards. Just moving on, it's good to see Councillors Corey and Councillors Morn here this morning. And on that note, is there any executive member announcements, please? Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to join with you in thanking Di Coulson for her hard work. It's been an absolute pleasure working with her and strengthening the relationship we have with Lincolnshire Police. And we look forward to welcoming Martin when he joins us in a few weeks' time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Corey. Is there any other, excuse me, Executive Council announcements? Anything on Teams, Kiara?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Senior officers, are there any officer announcements from the lead officers? Seems I've got an announcement from Will Mason. Are you there, Will?
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much. If it pleases the committee, I'd like to provide an update on the progress to reopen the Irman Community Library Hub.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So as a reminder to the committee, there has been work ongoing with Bishop Grotesque College to open the hub at the Irman, which has been closed for a number of years following the previous occupants going into administration. This has taken somewhat longer than initially anticipated. As I'm sure the committee is aware, there are kind of significant supply chain issues with property and a huge amount of workload that people are catching up from due to the kind of lockdowns of COVID. But I'm pleased to announce that the work is due to commence this week. In fact, it may have even started today on the putting of the new boiler into the hub. Previously, the boiler was actually shared by two separate occupants of the building, and it was decided that this was a wonderful opportunity to actually upgrade the infrastructure in the hub. So that work has now commenced, and whilst we don't have a completion date, it is expected to finish by the end of March. So we have a completion window, as it were. I'm also pleased to be able to announce that as of yesterday, colleagues in Legal and Property Services have shared the heads of terms for the new lease arrangement with the college. And assuming that those are satisfactorily accepted by the college and they are the standard county council heads of terms, that means that we will be able to proceed with getting the lease finalised and signed such that when the handover is ready, because we've completed the works in the boiler, Bishop Grotesque will be able to occupy and open the hub as soon as possible thereafter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
I just wanted to say, noted with grateful thanks, Chair. I know I moan about it and I'm determined to keep it on the agenda, but I do appreciate the amount of hard work that's going in, and I'm really pleased to hear this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other senior officer announcements, please? Okay, in that case, we'll move on to the agenda proper. Item 5 is the service level performance reporting against the performance framework. This item is on pages 17 to 56 of the agenda pack and sets out the Tier 2 service level performance measures for 2021-2022, quarter 3, that are within the remit of this scrutiny committee. I understand the report will be presented by Sarah Barry, who's Head of Safer Communities, Mark Baxter, Chief Fire Officer, Will Mason, Head of Culture, Steve Batchelor, Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership Senior Manager, and also Lee Surdyfield, Assistant Director Corporate. The actions of the committee is we're invited to review and comment on the performance information contained in this report and highlight any recommendations or further actions for consideration. I think the first item on the agenda, just bear with me, is domestic abuse. Now, presumably, Sarah, you're there to take that one, please.
I am, yes. Good morning, everyone. I think what we see with the figures around domestic abuse, both for the support service and for the next measure, which is MARAC, is actually what we would expect to see. I don't think we're seeing anything unusual. We've done quite a lot of analysis now about what happened during COVID, and I think we were expecting to see a large upshift. We didn't during our COVID period, but what we did see was a change in behaviour and I guess a move to a more appropriate method of referral from the police. I think the police did quite a lot of work at looking what they were referring through to service, and it was being under referred. So we are now seeing appropriate levels of referral through from all our partners, but particularly police, into outreach services. I think what that has shown us to some extent is that actually our services needed some extra funding, and thankfully that was available through some COVID additional funding through both the PCC and the Ministry of Justice. So I think the only thing I'd like to say about the figures there, you know, they are cumulative and they are around what we would like to see. We've had to do some work with the services to help them manage that level of referral in, but our current commission service, Eden Links, have been very responsive to that and have changed the way they operate to ensure that those highest risk victims have got the support they need. And likewise with MARAC, I think we are seeing what we should see through MARAC. It's comparative to what we've seen in previous years. The MARAC process went virtual, and actually that's working really well, and it will stay virtual. It's allowed those multi-agency members who can support high-risk victims of domestic abuse to meet on a very regular basis and discuss each of those cases and put in the right support around those high-risk victims. So yes, those figures are where we would expect them.
Okay, thank you. Have we any questions for Sarah at this point? Okay, we'll move on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I was reading on page 36 about the numbers using the libraries, but it seemed that the baseline figures we used were 2016.
Mr. Clark, we're just dealing with the domestic abuse.
Okay, sorry, my apologies.
We'll come to that in due course. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next one on page 23 is primary fires. Mark Baxter, are you there, please?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Councillor Pepper. So as per normal, if it's okay, I'd just like to invite Ryan Stacey to come and present this. I mean, he's our strategic lead for performance, and has the pleasure of knowing all the details in regards to how we perform over the quarter. So I'm just going to hand over him to just present over this section, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, over to you then, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I won't go through line by line. We're performing against our stretch target across all of our areas, across all of our fire measures, with the exception of one. So I'll bring two measures of particular attention to you. The first is fire fatalities. Over the last 9 months, the first 3 quarters, we have had 5 fire fatalities, which is unusually high in Lincolnshire. We've had 2 accidental dwelling fires, sadly, 2 deliberate fires, which were as a result of suicides, and 1 tragic fire in a holiday caravan, which you will certainly remember during the summertime. This is higher than usual for Lincolnshire. The comparative data is available for England for the previous 12 months, and on average, over a 12-month period, 5.6 is the All England average. So we're certainly not a huge outlier in that respect, but it is a lot higher than we would normally expect. The number here does fluctuate, and in some respects we have little control over those minor variations, albeit every one of those fire fatalities is a tragedy, and one that we do a considerable amount of work in the background to prevent and to assure communities. The other area is deliberate secondary fires. We are behind target on our deliberate secondary fires stretch target. That equates to only 6 behind where we were last year, but we are behind target. Refuse and refuse containers continue to be the biggest cause. There is a small increase. We're doing some work over in Summergangs Lane in Gainsborough, and that does account for some of that increase. We are working with the Arson Task Force and partners to prevent the causes of those fires. Again, important to note that the national average for predominantly rural fire and rescue services for 2020-2021 granted for the whole 12-month period was 502 deliberate secondary fires. LFR for the last 9 months have only had 199. So again, we are significantly less than the national average for predominantly rural fire and rescue services. So although we are behind our target, it is a stretch target. So that is worthy of note. We are presenting to the Executive Council some proposed amendments to the performance data that we will bring to this scrutiny committee. We'll do that over the next month or so. Any of those changes won't happen until Q1 of next year. And the aim there is to be able to provide and include some of this comparative data where available so that you can scrutinise how we're performing against other fire and rescue services across the UK. I'll be happy to discuss any other performance areas, but otherwise I'll open it up to questions.
Okay, any questions then, please? Councillor Sneath.
Thank you. Just a clarification really on the fires in waste. Is this where people set fire to skips rather than have paid for having it emptied? Or can you clarify a bit about that for me, please?
I guess there's two issues there. One's deliberate fires and the other one is accidental. But Ryan, are you able to answer that one, please?
Yes, it all gets a little bit technical between what is a primary fire and what's a secondary fire. So a primary fire is one which involves property, and a secondary fire is one that does not involve property. So there are cases where skips and refuse containers, if it was a recycling centre, for example, that may be classed as a primary fire, whereas refuse containers in the centre of Lincoln, for example, or indeed piles of rubbish, the sorts of incidents you're referring to tend to be fly tipping and subsequent setting fire of that fly tipping. So that they would definitely consider, they would count as secondary fires. The reality is we will target both causes of those. So we will target the primary and the secondary fires, irrespective of whether they technically sit in one category or indeed the other.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Just to carry on from that, so if they're set intentionally, what is the recourse to if you can find who's actually carried it out?
So we work with the Arson Task Force, and our fire investigators will try to establish cause where applicable. Clearly, we will work with police where there's an avenue to prosecute. We did last summer. We undertook a prosecution of some arsonists who were setting fire to stacks and bales of hay. So we do it wherever we can do and where we can find a culprit. Clearly, within the centres of our cities, it's a lot easier because we have CCTV. We have recourse to those sorts of evidence gathering facilities. And of course, there are often witnesses. Otherwise, we do find it quite difficult to prove who did it, even if we can establish what the cause was.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just looking through the agenda, the only one not achieved is the deliberate secondary fires, Ryan. And as you put it in perspective, only 6 additional incidents over the 9-month period makes that difference. It just shows how fine-tuned the statistics are. But just over the page on that, on page 30, looking back over the years, Q1 and Q2 have all seen the highest amount of incidents. Just for the benefit of this committee, Ryan, can you briefly tell us why there's that trend, please?
Yeah, it's quite simple. It's the weather. So it's the weather because there are people out and about. There are people out in the later in the evenings setting fires. It tends to be youths. There's also a huge amount more garden waste available. So there's an awful lot more people who are disposing illegally of garden waste and setting fire to it in either verges, field laybys, things like that. So we do get a lot more instances of that kind of thing through the summer months.
Okay, thank you. Just on the accidental dwelling fires, Ryan, I note there's a reduction in cooking fires, a reduction of 14% in fact, which is a good thing. Would you say that as time's gone on, we're moving away from the traditional chip pan and we're using air fryers and more modern appliances? Is that to help in the reduction, please?
Yeah, it certainly does. So we've for a number of years, as you're well aware of, been trying to discourage people from traditional deep fat frying, where of course you'd fill a third of a frying pan or a saucepan full of hot oil, and heat it up to a point where you can cook food in it. Actually, that's partly due to our efforts has reduced, but also just culturally, people are moving away from and moving towards a more healthy way of cooking. So that certainly has had a big impact. We tend to notice a lot more is it's about housekeeping. So it's the cleanliness of grill pans and things like that. So it's the accumulation of fats and oils in cookers as opposed to sort of leaving cooking unattended, for example.
Made worse at one point in time where you'd come home from the pub, or certain people come home from the pub slightly inebriated, decide to cook themselves some chips and fall asleep, yeah?
Yeah, I would suggest it's always better to avail yourself of a takeaway in that case.
Okay. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I can remember my own mother being told off by a fire officer for having one of these deep chip pans. I mean, I don't know how some of us ever got to adult life, frankly, given what was going on in our houses. But thank you for that. Yeah, what I really wanted to ask about was the farm fires. I think the figure I read was 94. I'm just wondering what type of fires seem to be prevalent in a farm, and is there any seasonal variation? For instance, when it's very hot, do you get loads of hay burning? How does it work? Because 94 seems to be a lot of fires. Thank you.
Okay, Ron, are you able to answer that one, please?
Yeah, although 94 seems like a lot, clearly we're in a very rural community with an awful lot of farm and agricultural land. We do get the seasonal variation. A lot of it is agricultural machinery and fires caused by an accumulation of combustible material in agricultural machinery, which then subsequently heats. Clearly, we end up with farmers with trying to avail themselves of a really narrow window in terms of the ability to gather harvests. Often it's done through outsourced contractors that are helping gather those crops that are working across a number of different farms with agricultural machinery. So clearly the ability to keep those machines free of some of that combustible material is absolutely crucial to reducing those fires. There are a small number of fires that are in agricultural outbuildings, barns, storage facilities, that kind of thing. But again, the numbers, or even in the 90s, is actually quite low. And again, I'll be interested in doing some comparative work for you to see what other similarly rural communities are like.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray, followed by Councillor Dunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We heard that there's been five fire fatalities, which I understand is very unusual. It must be very difficult for officers dealing with those issues, and it must take up considerable time. I just want to ask, is there sufficient resources available to deal with those incidents and then to learn from those findings so that hopefully we can prevent those similar fatalities happening in the future? Okay, thank you. Ryan.
Yeah, there's a number of strands to that. Yeah, we have, in terms of the resources to investigate those fires, we work very closely with police, crime scene investigators, of course, to gather evidence both at a investigatory perspective and a forensic level, depending on the level of investigation. So we have a number of people on duty to cover around the clock to investigate not just fatal fires, but of course fires of other learning. That gets pulled together. We learn lessons locally, so we have serious injury and fatal fire review meetings. So as a result of some of those, we will learn lessons between multi-agency partners to see if there's anything that we could do from an adult social care perspective, from a community perspective, fire and rescue service, policing, etc. And some of those, of course, may lead to something, a formal review like a domestic homicide review, etc. So we are very bought into that process. In terms of the learning from a fire and rescue service perspective, we pull those figures together nationally. Although 5 is a very, very large number, we do pull together the national figures. So again, across the country, there are circa 200 fire fatalities in a year. So we will seek to get a greater understanding of the figures at a national level.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing what I noticed when we go to page 32, talking about the dwellings, accidental fire, we didn't talk about cigarettes. I would like to know what's the rate of fires caused by smoking indoors, because some people, they fall asleep if they are drunk, they will light a cigarette and fall asleep. And there's other things which is sometimes, because I'm not a smoker, but it attracts my attention when you are driving. There's a lot of drivers on the road, they smoke and they just tip, you know, the cigarette butt to the road. Can you give us any rates and how many of these dwellings or accidental fires, dwelling fires, are caused by cigarettes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ron, are you able to answer that one?
Yeah, I can't give any specific figures. Certainly, there's modern cigarettes are designed not to burn at a high temperature. They're designed that they will they're less likely to cause fires. Where we do have a particular concern is where there's the illegal manufacture of cigarettes, and we work very closely with trading standards in order to prevent the sort of proliferation of illegal cigarettes. And there have been a number of tragic incidents across the country, and indeed one locally, where illegal cigarettes accounted for a fire fatality. The numbers of smoking related fires are on the decline across the country, and that's largely due to the reduction in number of people who are actually smoking. But certainly carelessly decided smoking materials is something that we do monitor, but it's nowhere near as high as cooking fires in terms of both accidental dwelling fires or indeed fire fatalities.
Okay, thank you. I see no one else wishing to speak. No, okay, so we'll move on. The next set of performance figures are regarding libraries. So over to you, Will.
Thank you, Councillor Pepper. I've been very proud of what the team's delivered over the last couple of years during the impact of COVID on libraries and heritage. We've consistently performed at or above the regional and national kind of performance levels that we're seeing as we've gone through recovery. This said, I think this is the first quarter where I've been able to share performance that genuinely feels like we've turned the final corner with regards to that impact. He says, hopefully not jinxing anything. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. As previously shared, we are still finding that there is a change in patterns to people using our library services when visiting to take out books, to use computers, etc. The primary change is that people are visiting less often, but they're taking more books with them on those fewer visits. So although we're actually finding that the physical visits to libraries are below pre-COVID levels, in terms of the issues of books, we are at or above pre-COVID levels, which continues to be very reassuring and could actually lead to perhaps even some further improvements. Visits to the library website, we've continued to deliver very strongly in terms of our digital engagement. And particularly, you know, early on in the days of COVID, we had massive uplifts in people using our e-services, and we continue to achieve and exceed the target during Q3 for visits to the library website. Although as previously reported, even during the first kind of reopenings of libraries across the country, and for us particularly in Lincolnshire, we weren't able to open up our library facilities for the use of local communities. Since we have done so, that has been greeted very positively, and for Q3, October, November and December, we have actually exceeded the target. So again, that's a very positive sign that our communities now feel once again ready, able and safe to come back out and use our libraries for lots of really exciting and positive reasons. In terms of heritage, it's a very, very similar story. Obviously, heritage has been closed for parts of this financial year as well, and some of our sites are still operating on reduced hours. But the last few weeks, I think, have shown some amazing performances. So during half term, it really felt when I was visiting sites that buzz that we would expect to see during school holidays was back in our heritage sites for the first time since, I suppose, at the very least, kind of February half term 2020, but potentially even earlier than that. So that was very exciting. We've had a couple of very positive kind of events and event weekends. 2 weekends ago, we had a steampunk market and one of our dog-friendly days at Lincoln Castle, and we had over 12,000 people through the grounds in 2 days. The collection had its artisan weekend recently as well, and we had over 1,700 people through the museum, which is nearly a 50% increase on the last artisan market that we held there. So once again, we are really seeing that demand is back. We've also very recently, you may have noticed the advert for the exhibition, which has just started as my backdrop, and we had over 1,500 people through the weekend seeing that exhibition as well. So we really do feel that has been a really kind of strong uplift in performance since Christmas, particularly. Obviously, we are still fighting against the first 2 quarters where we were significantly down because we weren't open so much. But these are very positive signs, and particularly as we move into the next financial year, when we are increasing some of our opening hours further in response to this high demand. Finally, we do continue to exceed the target in terms of overall enjoyment of the services as our visitors rate them when they attend. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Where Councillor Clark, an earlier question, is that still does that still stand?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was on page 36. You mentioned that there's some stats there that were on the baselines in 2016. I was wondering whether we were likely to have any update on those figures. And I was pleased to see on page 39 that there was so many interactions with the website. It's obviously attracting people's attention and therefore hopefully increasing numbers coming to the county. And on page 41, you mentioned percentages regarding feedback forms. Do we actually know the number of feedback forms that have been dealt with? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll start with the baseline on performance. Although this was set in 2016, it is actually reviewed on an annual basis. The fact that the baseline hasn't changed in recent years is not because it hasn't been reviewed annually. It more reflects the national trend where library visits are fairly static. That might not sound a particularly positive thing to say, but actually it's off the back of a decade or two of physical visits to libraries falling. So it is a positive in that respect. Completely concur and appreciate the comment about interactions with our websites. The change to kind of digital engagement for libraries, for culture, for heritage, the arts, has been ongoing for a number of years now. A lot of our visitors to libraries come to use computers, whether they're looking for a job, whether they're doing research, whether they are a business that find those IT facilities incredibly important. It works both in terms of physical visits to libraries, but also people engaging with our digital services externally from their own homes, etc. I think what we've seen with COVID is a significant acceleration of the move into the digital world for the whole of culture, which I think is a positive. Nothing will ever beat the authenticity and the quality that one gets by actually visiting our libraries and our heritage sites, and obviously the expertise that talking to our staff brings with it. But overall, it is still a very positive thing. Finally, I don't have the number of the visitor survey forms in front of me. I do know that it is a relatively small number compared to what it would be in a non-COVID year, because we did actually have a period of time where people weren't very happy about physically picking up pens and filling in pieces of paper. But we do actually also run some parallel analysis of whether people are enjoying their visits to our sites, because what we find is a really strong indicator of people's enjoyment is the feedback they leave on TripAdvisor. And I think I've probably reported it in previous years, but all of our heritage sites on an annual basis do achieve the TripAdvisor excellence rating in terms of how our users and our visitors are feeding back to us, and our rating is out of 5 stars. We average 4.5 out of 5 stars, and it's also a really valid two-way piece of interaction. And in fact, going forwards, I would say it's probably a stronger indicator than the pieces of paper we get our visitors to fill in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny, did you wish to speak? Okay, you go ahead then. Councillor Dunny, then Councillor Lee. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The only thing it's good to see that there is an increase in our libraries, and I'm very, very happy to see that Boston Library is busy. It's not a question, it's just more like a sort of I would like to have more knowledge, because we know we have these mobile libraries around. Does the county council work with these people and see how they are doing in small villages and small places? If we may have some information on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Will, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, broadly speaking, I can. We actually did a fairly fundamental review of our mobile library service a couple of years ago. It's an incredibly important part of what we deliver. Lincolnshire is a very rural county. We acknowledge that there are people for whom mobility isn't always the easiest. We have access elements to our mobile library service as well, where we can go into care homes, etc., and make sure that we give people the opportunity to access books where they can't physically get to a library. The mobile library service that we operate as well, the staff, the driver get to really know their kind of local routes. So they're able to anticipate and they're able to advise when they turn up and they see their regulars, and they are able to kind of, you know, sort of say to them, oh, we've got the latest. So I'm completely blank on a single name of an author at that point. We've got the latest Richard Osman mystery in. I've set it aside for you. And I think when we did that review, and I'd say a couple of years ago, it's probably more like 3 or 4 years ago now, we did spend quite a lot of time working with GLL, looking at the figures, looking at the routes to ensure they were as efficient as possible to maximise the return on it. We do have additional information on sort of, you know, how that operates. I don't have it to hand, but it could be provided in the future.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Danny beat me to my question. I was going to ask about mobile libraries as well. Can I ask if they still operate in the city of Lincoln? I don't know. I mean, years ago, it used to go to the West End. It used to go over to the far west, St George's. I remember that. And I wondered if it still operates in Lincoln, and if it does, how people can find out sort of what the route is when it comes to them. And just to say, this whole report, even on top of the stuff about the Irman Library, this whole report feels very positive, and well done to the officers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Are there, Will?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Councillor Lee. That's very much appreciated. Yes, we do still have mobile libraries that are working around the edges of the city as well. I live just on the south end of Lincoln, and there's one that comes to Bank Road. To find out all of the information, all of the routes, the times that they turn up and the days that they travel, it's all there on the County Council's website.
Can I just say, Chair, I think actually next time we do a newsletter, I might put something in about that, just so people know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sneath.
Thank you. I used to work on a mobile library van and in a library, and it was the happiest time of my life. It's marvellous. And now I'm a county councillor. I'm very involved in our village community hub and library in Pinchbeck. However, I think looking at the figures on community use of libraries, certainly at Pinchbeck, what we're finding is, because it's based in an old school, the rooms are quite small, and we're not getting the sort of bookings we used to get. In fact, several people have left us who had regular bookings because the rooms are too small and they don't feel like all getting together in comparatively small rooms. But we are at the moment using one of those rooms, for example, as a vaccination centre, and another one, we're packing goods for the Ukraine. So the community use is changing. It's still there, but it is a bit different. But as someone who's been involved with libraries for many years, I think we're still doing very well. I look forward to things improving in the future, but I'm certainly doing my best. I'm always coming away with lots of books. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sneath. Would you like to comment on that one, Will?
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Sneath. Our library is an amazing, our library network, it's an amazing network of, with both the core libraries, but particularly those community hubs that very much feel part of their locality. They're obviously run by and for the local community. I'm very familiar with Pinchbeck, and I know that there's been just a huge amount of amazing things delivered through that particular hub. And yes, I just say thank you very much, and give my assurances that we will continue to explore supporting the hubs so that they can continue to fulfil a very wide range of services.
Thank you. Well, on page 34 with the table there, COVID clearly has had an impact without any shadow of doubt. But since 2016, do I detect there's a slight decline anyway? And if that is the case, what reason would be for that?
I think that there is that sort of national trend that we have seen. People using computers where they didn't previously have them at home. There are more people that have them at home. There are people who have smartphones or different ways to access the internet. The advent of and I should say with a slight distaste in my mouth, places like Amazon, who of course can get books to people very quickly and very cheaply. There's room for booksellers and libraries to work alongside each other, of course, but it's definitely had an effect. We still find that there are particular demographics within our library services that we just continue to be very, very successful with. And I think this is why it's been incredibly important that the library services around the country, but particularly in Lincolnshire, have continued to explore these different facets to what they do. The fact that they are libraries is an incredibly important part of the Community Hub network, and it will long make that continue to be so. But the fact that there are a great number of other services that are delivered alongside them, I think has possibly helped to reduce what we might have seen as a larger decline over the years had we not done that.
Okay, thank you. I can see no further questions, so that concludes heritage and libraries. So thank you, Will, for that. The next set of performance figures are regarding road safety. So Steve Batchelor, are you there, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I don't intend to go into too much detail at this point and spoil all the fun of the main annual update we've got for road safety at this meeting. Just a couple of points from the performance indicators. The first I think that we can clearly see is that traffic numbers have increased back to pre-COVID levels in the main. There is a corresponding increase in the number of collisions, but the number of collisions are primarily where we would have expected them to be before all of those lockdowns and less traffic on the road. So there hasn't been a dramatic increase over what the baseline would have been. The other thing we often see in this quarter that's been reported is that there's a sort of steady incremental increase from the January months through into the summer months, and that's replicated in both the overall number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads in this period, but also for the younger age category as well. But unless there's any specific questions on this data, I'll reserve the rest of my comments for the full report, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I can see no questions, so we'll see you later, Steve. Next set of performance figures is trading standards. Over to you, Sarah.
Yes, so all I'd say, I suppose, around some of these figures is hopefully you're learning a bit more about trading standards, and these are just two small elements of the work that Trading Standards does, though they are one of our key priorities. So I didn't think this, I wanted to ensure that people didn't think this was the only thing Trading Standards were doing at the moment, obviously previously being very busy with avian flu and the wide breadth of Trading Standards activity. So illicit alcohol and tobacco, I think we've already heard from Fire about the importance of trying to control illicit tobacco. Particularly, we haven't seen as much alcohol recently, although I heard yesterday from an intelligence source that we are starting to see some increase in illicit alcohol. But our work continues on tobacco. It was interrupted to some extent by COVID. We weren't out and about as much, but I can reassure everyone we are now. We're back doing what we used to do. We're working very closely with the police licensing team and targeting places where we understand the products are being sold. It will be interesting to see what the current situation and war in Ukraine does to the supply of illicit tobacco, because we understand that quite a lot of it does come in from Eastern Europe and Russia and Belarus in particular, and whether that does reduce the supply, I think we'll wait to see. But as you can see over the last period, we have continued to seize it. We do work very closely with public health colleagues to try and develop that strategy around controlling illicit tobacco, because it undermines those other health initiatives around taxation, etc. So that's, I think, all I want to say on tobacco. Just as a reminder, not only are we going in and seizing products, but once we've done that, we are using that if we see a pattern of behaviour for any particular premise and shop, where in the past they will have just turned over the owners of that shop and the licensee, etc. We are now taking very strict action against the landlords of those premises, and that, I think, we are starting to see some early results of those, where premises that have previously been used as a shop that sells this, and sometimes that is the only thing some of these premises sell. They may look like an off license, but actually the predominant business is illicit tobacco, and the rest is somewhat of a disguise in some of these shops. We are seeing some of those shops close. I think we've still got a lot of work to do in that area, though. And then moving on to unsafe products. Again, some of the products we see have a high risk, including death and injury. So it is a priority for us. Again, some of the work we've done over the last year or so has been impacted by COVID. There's been less markets, less car boots, where we sometimes see some of this type of product being sold. But we continued, we did some early work on COVID related products such as masks and hand sanitizer. More recently, we've been back to looking through an intelligence-led approach on toys with magnets, cosmetics still. And sometimes these are linked to counterfeit goods, not always, but sometimes. And now these markets and car boots are more operational. I think we'll start to see figures rise in this area again. But we work very closely with our national colleagues in the Office of Product Safety and Standards. They provide some of the intelligence that leads us out to do some of this work, but the other levels of work are through our local intelligence feeds and sort of inspections and general surveillance as well. I will just complete the high risk premises inspected as a final trading standards measure. I'm really pleased that the team have been able to keep up with this. They're slightly behind due to COVID, as some of the premises that they needed to visit, it wasn't appropriate to do a face-to-face visit at the time. We have taken alternative forms of inspection and used letters and things, but nothing beats an actual physical visit to those most high-risk premises. I'm guessing it will be delayed slightly. We will be behind target because of the work we needed to do around the Christmas period and post-Christmas period, so around avian flu. But they are working hard to make sure that they do visit all the required premises.
Sarah, is it possible to give us an update on the avian flu, please?
Yeah, will do. I think we're going to bring a paper to a subsequent meeting, but just so we haven't seen, I can't remember the total. I think we had 15 incidents. I need to check that figure, but it was around 15 outbreaks in the county. They were predominantly in the north and east of the county, but we haven't seen any further outbreaks since that initial period of the January-February time. There was a more recent outbreak in the northeast Lincolnshire, but that didn't encroach on Lincolnshire. I think we had fantastic support from our colleagues in the Animal, Plant and Health Agency, but I do believe the whole system's going to be reviewed around the requirement to visit, etc. But we got really good compliance in those. When you get an outbreak, there's a restrictions put on a 3 kilometre zone around that, and they're the premises that we visit to check whether they're stock holding and whether they've got any chickens, whether it's one chicken in a back garden or several. So yes, it worked really well. The team worked really hard on it. We had great support from our colleagues in fire, who provided some of the temporary office space that we needed up in the north of the county, and we also then based ourselves at a highways locality in Manby. So it was really generally a one council approach to that outbreak, but with the sort of hard slog done by trading standards officers.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Brockway, followed by Councillor Dunny, followed by Councillor Clark.
Oh, I got in first there. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that. It's very interesting. You mentioned magnets and children. We're talking about fatalities of children and magnets. And I did want to raise something to this committee, which is the frequency of lithium batteries in children's toys, including in the toys of small children. Now, we know that these batteries can cause fatalities very quickly, within a few hours. Once they're swallowed, they eat through the gut and various other things, and it's a horrendous way to go. And yet they are put in children's toys all the time, including those of very young ones and even babies. So I wonder if that's something that we need to be writing to government about or taking up, because we know it's happening, yet it still happens. And you get a report saying, oh, some child has died or been rushed to hospital. Isn't it awful? And nothing's done. And I don't mean for Lincolnshire, I mean generally. But the other thing, which is a hidden danger and has been raised to me recently, is in children's clothing, there is a tag. It happens in a lot of clothing. It's a clear plastic tag with like a T-bar at the end, and it's there to hold different parts of suits and things like that together. Those frequently bury themselves in the clothes because you can't always get them out. And if they get into a child's mouth, they're very sharp and they can lodge. And it just worries me that these dangers are there. We know that they're happening, and yet there seems to be no move to change it. And I wonder whether we need to be proactive in this as far as Lincolnshire is concerned. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, good point. I think we've all encountered those nylon things. Are you able to comment on that for us, Sarah?
I'm not able to comment on the plastic tags. I think that's something I will take away and check whether there's anything nationally going on around that and what the data is around that. You are absolutely correct, Councillor Brockway, on the batteries. They are a threat. I think there's an acceptance on today's electronic world that toys that make noises and sounds and interact with a child from very young children, batteries will always be an element of those sorts of toys. The importance is the protection of the concealment of the battery and their stability within the toy to not be removed. So I think there's an element of, and that's some of the work we would do, seeing what's being imported, what's making its way into Lincolnshire, working with our colleagues in Office for Product Safety and Standards, and they've done a big campaign around lithium batteries in child products and toys. So there's an element of us doing some enforcement work and checking that nothing like that is making its way onto the market where the battery is accessible and will fall out, but also working with colleagues to ensure parents are aware of that risk, and we will do a lot. There's probably some more work we can do with our colleagues and our health visitors around that, and our colleagues in child health. So that it's a good prompt to do that, but we certainly ourselves do a lot of work promoting the risks around lithium batteries and magnets, these very small magnets, which seem to be a bit of a trend, which can do similar types of damage to lithium batteries.
Thank you. I've asked the chairman if I can come back. Thank you very much for that. It's really good to hear that you're onto it. Basically, it's but I do wonder. I mean, they can have batteries that are not lithium. Ordinary batteries are in an awful lot of toys that make noises, and they're very successful. And it would be really good. But also, I meant to say, and I forgot, that the lithium batteries are even appearing in children's clothes now. So when you get the flashy Christmas jumpers with the lights, it's lithium batteries that keep those going, which is fine until the child child rips a hole in the jumper and the battery comes out. So having bought one very stupidly for my grandson, you know, I realised the danger of what I had done. But yeah, I just wanted to raise that. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to touch on two things. The first thing is illegal cigarettes. Well, West Street in Boston is quite famous of having off licenses. And most of them, they're just having in the center of their shops, I think a pallet of these energy drinks, the cheap ones, which is cost, I think, 39p. So it's packed there in the middle. And obviously they are selling illegal cigarettes because some of them now they're trading from 5 o'clock in the morning. So they're making the money. That's one thing. Is there anything we can do about that? And we check and do probably some visit to these shops. The second thing, which is I would like to touch, is I do believe that a lot of these shops as well, they're selling alcohol coming from Russia. And now, because of the trade and the sanctions put forward to Russian government, it's not right that we're selling alcohol from Russia in our country or in our county in general. And on the top of that, we still selling a lot of sausages and meats coming from Russia, and it's all written in Russian. So is there anything we can do about that and double check the shops? I'm aware that the situation is probably bigger than what we think, because these issues should be stopped at our borders, not getting it in here, but we are having it. And it probably is a mammoth task for our trading standards in the county to go and deal with it. But we would like to see some actions. I would like to see some actions and tackle these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Sarah.
Okay, yeah. So unfortunately at the moment, energy drinks are not controlled. I think from some of the things and incidents that we've seen over the last couple of years, there is, I suspect in the future there may be controls, especially around an age-related sales issue around energy drinks, but at the moment there are no controls on them in this country. So it's probably an education issue, and I think we will be seeing some work with public health and ourselves on school food, and it's one of those that I think I don't think we see these products in schools, but at the moment there is the legislation is quite limited around those. Similarly, anything to do with Russia, and as long as the products are legal to sell, that's an ethical and moral decision that stores will need to take about the sale of items that originate in Russia, as long as they're legal. And foreign label food, it is an issue. We are aware of it. It should be labelled in English as well as in a foreign language. We do work closely with our environmental health colleagues who are based in district councils, but it is something the resource pressures on trading standards allow us to do some targeted work, but I have to say, you know, there are limitations on that. And where we are aware of it, we will try and get out there, but having to sort of prioritise resources in trading standards, sometimes other things do take precedent for our food work due to the risks involved on that. We are focusing on allergens work. That's where the highest risk around food standards are. But obviously, if a product is labelled in a foreign language, then you can't understand what allergens might be in those products. So it is something that we are aware of. We will take action where resources allow, I guess, is what I need to say.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danny, did you want to come back on that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just my question wasn't about the energy drinks, is the people, the shops, which is they're off license. They don't have any other products in the shops. The shops basically are empty. And in the middle of the shops, they put these big pallets of these cheap energy drinks. It just took over themselves behind the counter, but they're selling illegal cigarettes all the time. And as I stated, some of them, they're open now 5 o'clock in the morning, because people coming from factories, they go straight and buy or go into the factory. So it just, the activity around that and the way they hide their illegal stuff, that's what I meant to say.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware of that, Sarah? And
Yes. I'll take that back. I will double check that West Street in Boston is on our intelligence list to target. I'm sure it is. And actually what Councillor Danny says is what we do find is that although they look like general stores, actually the way they're making their money is through the sale of illicit tobacco. We have to be quite clever in the way we approach that, because as Councillor Danny says, there are all sorts of hides and methods of distributing that illegal tobacco and hiding it from us. We do use dogs, but actually our teams, our police teams and our trading standards teams have got quite clever themselves in finding the hides, but the stores are always one step ahead of us on that, but we will continue that approach, including seizing the items as much as we can, taking the sellers to court for both illicit and unsafe tobacco, because a lot of this tobacco fits into that unsafe area as well, and then taking action against the landlords as well. It's a whole process that keeps us very busy.
Come back one more time. Okay.
Just we tend to probably punish the landlords, because I'm a landlord. I won't like to be punished, because if I rent my property to someone and I sign with them the contract and we have an agreement, and you state to them what is allowed, what is not allowed, it's their duties to look after the place. Because the landlord, if he's not living, for example, in Lincoln, he lives in London or Manchester, and he rents a shop to someone because that's his property and it's an income for that person, and then somebody is doing illegal stuff in that shop, I don't see how fit it is. I'm not, defending anyone here, but I don't see it see that fit to go to that person, because you are the landlord. I'm gonna punish you and I'm gonna get you involved in that matter. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems a bit harsh. If somebody doing the wrong thing, it's like you rent a flat to someone because that person was meeting all the criteria, and probably after 3 months, he started dealing in probably drugs in the property, and I'm not, there to watch him and see what he's doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to talk 3 times. Thank you.
Councillor Danley, would you wish to comment first?
Yes, I think so. I think what we don't do is it's not a one-off. So it's where we see a pattern of behaviour, because often where alcohol licensing and often the two go together, we can take the license off the person, and there's no, in this country we don't have a license requirement to sell tobacco or any other sort of key consumer products like that. So anybody can set themselves up. But actually what we then saw was that we take out the owner of that shop, the person who's selling it, and it'd just be replaced by another person. So where we see a pattern of behaviour in a particular premise, we will warn the landlord that this has happened in the shop owned by them. We will warn them that if they don't put in particular methods to ensure that there is no criminality in their premise, so they would be allowing their premise to be used for criminal means. They have some responsibility under money laundering legislation to say their premise isn't being used for criminal means, and if we see a pattern of behaviour of subsequent or criminal activity, then we quite rightly take action against that landlord, because the rent they are gaining from that property is criminal, is derived from criminal activity, and therefore can be included as money laundering. So it's a money laundering offence that we take should there be a significant pattern of criminal activity from their premise.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of questions for you. You gave us some details about the bird flu, which I was going to ask about. I'm actually on another committee, which is Scrutiny Panel B, dealing with farming and our support. Would you be able to send me the details, please, of the locations of the bird flu and the known cost financial loss that each of those farms have suffered, if you're able to. And the other questions I got was regarding the intelligence. You say you get intelligence gathering. Is most of that relying on tip-offs, or have you got some very good police officers or trading standards officers that know where to go for information? And on high-risk premises that you inspect, I assume you do abattoirs, but I'll ask that question anyway. Thank you.
Sarah, but
Okay, yes.
I fear
So,
of divulging where good intelligence
yes.
are able to question.
So on avian flu, as I said, we will bring a fuller report to next scrutiny on avian flu. So and so I think we'll be able to include those sorts of elements in that. We will be able to show you where those incidents were, because that is public information and was on the APHA Woods website. The loss, I'm not sure we'll be able to calculate that, but where birds have had to be culled, not where they've died of avian flu, but where the APHA have gone in and culled birds, they do get compensation. So it isn't an outright loss. There is a compensation scheme where birds are culled. But we will include that in the report if that's okay to bring to the next committee meeting. On the intelligence we get across our trading standards realm, including illicit tobacco, we use all sources of intelligence. We do get some reports from the public, and that's reporting through Citizens Advice Consumer Helpline, which is the national front door for trading standards. We do get some information through Crime Stoppers, so that's reported anonymously. And then, you know, we work very closely with police on things like illicit tobacco and illicit alcohol. They get reports and we get reports directly. We also get quite a good intelligence flow from local schools where they see their pupils using this sort of tobacco and product. And I think in the future we'll also, I understand there's a rising issue with vape pens among school children, which is an age restricted product as well. So schools and head teachers are a really important source of information from on tobacco as well. And some of the information we get is through a national intelligence network where we get the information from HMRC around what's coming into the country, what they're finding in other parts of the country. And therefore that allows us to go look for those in Lincolnshire. So that's intel does come from all sorts of information. And I've forgotten what the last question was. I've made some notes, but I can't read them. Sorry, can you remind me what the last?
Yes, it was regarding inspections of high-risk premises, and I referred to abattoirs.
Yes, sorry, yes. High risk can be, they are mainly food high risk premises, but there are some other high risk premises that are in there, but most of them are food standards. Abattoirs wouldn't necessarily be on that. The veterinary inspections of abattoirs, what were the old meat inspectors, still sit within the Animal Plant and Health Agency and the Food Standards Agency. So they would be done by those. But we do have links in with abattoirs because of the welfare of animals attending abattoirs. We get a lot of intelligence flow that animals are being brought to market when they're not fit. And we still would occasionally check the weights and measures equipment that is held within an abattoir. So there are some work, but they wouldn't necessarily fit into our high risk inspections. They would be more likely where food manufacturing plants that use allergens, use nuts, where there's some risk around the product that they are making and the scale and volume of product that they are making as well. Some of those risks are controlled by other inspection processes that supermarkets, etc., will be put in, but then we would add that risk in as well.
Thank you for that comprehensive reply.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's just ask for clarification, please, around the report on into voluntary and community groups, that it wasn't achieved. I just wondered what that was about. Thank you.
I think that's the next item we're going to talk about. Yeah, sure. We'll come to that in a minute. Any further speakers on trading standards and unsafe products, illicit alcohol, etc.? No, I think we've exhausted that. So thank you for that, Sarah. We'll now go on to the voluntary groups on page 53. Last but not least, Lee, are you there?
I certainly am. Thank you. So I'll start with the voluntary groups and the target that Councillor Lee's just referred to. So you'll see from the report pack that 549 groups were supported with a target of 600, so it did fall short of the target that was set. Members should recognise that the target is for individual groups, so each group is counted once against the target. In the quarter concerned, 976 groups were actually supported, so there was far more work going on than the 549 measure suggests, but they weren't individual groups, they were groups accessing more than once in the 976 figure. So in terms of volunteers, the target was exceeded, so 1,229 volunteers were supported to access opportunities. And what we're seeing in a similar way to last quarter is an upturn in the number of volunteering opportunities being brought forward by organisations. And we've seen 41 organisations come forward this quarter to work with colleagues at VCS and LCVS to access support. There's been 386 volunteers go through various training opportunities, so and they've been put into traditional volunteering roles, as well as working through some employer volunteering schemes. And we've also seen a number of courses operate around things like equality and diversity and health and safety and first aid. And again, volunteers have been put through those courses where appropriate. What we've also seen is a kind of continued demand on the infrastructure bodies, on LCVS and VCS, around access to advice and guidance. So a lot of that has been around funding advice and training advice, but also those organisations seeking to complete DBS checks for volunteers that will be coming into their organisations. I think the final point to leave you with is that part of the grant agreement that we have with the voluntary and community sector infrastructure bodies is to leverage funding into Lincolnshire, so to support those voluntary organisations to bring money in. And during the last quarter, £677,000 of funding was brought into Lincolnshire through the efforts of the voluntary and community sector. So I think that's a positive position for us to be in, that investment is coming in to support the activities that those voluntary groups undertake. So I'll pause there, Councillor Pepper, but as always, happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back, Lee, and just make sure. I'm sure it's a yes, and I'm sure that there are statutory agencies involved, obviously, but are officers confident that, given the influx of Ukrainian refugees that we will hopefully be taking and supporting, that we've got the capacity to support and, you know, make sure that that's happening? Because there'll be a lot of voluntary groups as well as the statutory ones, I would have imagined anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, so the answer is a yes. We're already working with voluntary organisations to put plans in place around how we will respond, both now and if people come across to the UK. So there's already plans in place around donations, both in terms of goods and funding, as well as kind of mental health support for those that are impacted by the current crisis. So that work is underway. We're working with colleagues at the Community Foundation and partners in the LRF, and that will see a multi-agency response to it as a result.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. It was enlightening to read the number of organisations and groups that we are involved with. Obviously, there's a large number of volunteers within the county. I'd like to ask, do we ever publicly thank our volunteers? It's a subject where I think they unsung heroes, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I know for sure we have at various occasions, and not too long ago letters have been sent, but could you just answer that for us, Lee?
Yeah, so as you've said, Councillor Pepper, we recently wrote to voluntary organisations to thank them for the efforts during the pandemic, due to the level of volunteering work that took place and the outcomes that were achieved as a result. What we've also done through VCS and LCVS is some engagement work with the volunteering community sector to understand how they find volunteering and to gain greater insight into both barriers that prevent people from accessing it, but also what we can make better for them. That's helping us to make sure that we've got that feedback mechanism in place to provide thanks to individuals, but also to learn from them. And I think last time we spoke about protecting the mental well-being of some of the volunteers, so that work's ongoing. I think at the next meeting, we've got Ben Rollitt coming to present, who's the Chief Executive of the Voluntary Centre Services, so one of the organisations that makes up the data that is sent through to you on a regular basis. And I'm sure Ben would be more than happy to expand on the way that we engage with volunteers and how that thanks is passed through. But certainly, I know this committee's on more than one occasion has written to them. Okay,
Lee, just to answer Councillor Clark's question fully, can you confirm that letters of thanks were sent, excuse me, on behalf of this committee?
Yes, they were. They were sent. I think it was at the start of the year. They were sent or end of last year.
Thank you. Can see no further questions. Sorry, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just with regard to the support offered by LCVS and VCS, I mean, they do offer some great support, but the complaints I get from the groups I do within my patch, and I've got a big patch, Horncastle and the Keels, the town of Horncastle, 36 parishes, all the support they offer is online. It's still all online. It's predominantly during the day, and there's nothing face-to-face. And this does exclude a lot of people. So the plea I would have is that going forward, they do offer some evening support, some evening sessions, whether it be online or face-to-face, but they do now start to offer more face-to-face support now we're coming out of the pandemic, because I constantly hear that complaint about those two organisations and the support they offer.
Are you able to answer, Lee?
Yeah, so I meet with both David Fanning and Ben Rollitt on a regular basis, so I'll take that feedback back to them, Councillor Gray, and look at how we can encourage them to move to a position where there's greater level of accessibility to the services. But it's useful feedback for us to feed in.
Okay, thank you. Lee, on page 54, the top table there, Q1 every year is far higher than any other quarter. Is that like fire and rescue, something to do with the weather? Could you answer that, please?
So the figures are cumulative. So we tend to see a number of organisations engaged at the start, and as we explained, they're counted once. So we tend to have that peak at the start as a result of that. But the organisations continue to engage with VCS and LCVS throughout the year, but they're counted at the start when they first come into contact.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. Okay, so I'm going to move that we receive the report and that we are satisfied with the performance achieved in Q3. Further, we request that our comments and recommendations from today's debate, as recorded, are taken under consideration. Can you raise your hand if you agree, please? Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now turn to the next agenda item, item 6, which is the Road Safety Partnership Report. This item is on pages 57 to 98 of the agenda pack and invites us to consider and comment on the annual report, which provides an update on fatal and on killed and serious injury KSI casualty figures for Lincolnshire. This item will be presented by Steve Batchelor via Teams. So, are you there, Steve?
Yep, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I don't intend to go through line by line because, as highlighted by the page numbers, there is a lot of information, but what I'll try and do is draw out the key findings from this report. I would like to note and give my thanks for us allowing us to report at this meeting as opposed to the October one that we would usually have done. What this has allowed me to do is to provide local data up to the end of 2021, whereas if I had been present in October, we would have been almost a year delayed. Now, whilst we do therefore have up-to-date local information, we still can't bring our national and regional comparisons right up to date because that has to go through a process of validation with the Department for Transport, where they collate all of the information from every local authority across the UK. But it does mean that you're getting killed and serious injury data up to the end of 2021 and the full 2020 year as well. I'm going to begin on page 59 and just take some of the key facts that have come from the supplementary data document and just the high level statistics. So as with previous years, the majority of people killed and seriously injured in Lincolnshire do occur on the rural road network as opposed to in built up areas. The casualties are more likely to be male than female. Collisions are distributed throughout the county across the whole of the road network, but there is the highest percentage occurring within the East Lindsey district. The highest risk groups in 2021 remained high-powered two-wheel motor vehicles, so motorcycle riders, young drivers between the ages of 17 and 24 years, and mature road users over the age of 60 years. Now, those statistics don't apportion any blame whatsoever. It's just to state that the categories are the highest represented. On page 60, we've got the tables and graphs which outline the overall numbers of people killed and seriously injured. I'm very pleased to note that in 2021 we did see a reduction in the number of fatalities, but at 40 that's clearly still significant and far too high, but it's a reduction on the previous year, which was 52, and 2019 where it was 54. We saw a pretty significant reduction in 2020 in the overall number of people killed and seriously injured, from 534 in 2019 to 446 in 2020. And in 2021, that's at 452. So very similar for 2020-2021. Clearly, there will be a coronavirus impact in there. It makes it very difficult for me to make direct comparisons between previous years because there were different restrictions and lockdown conditions applied throughout the country throughout that period, and it meant that the volume of traffic increased and decreased, and also the nature and type of journeys varied quite significantly as well. So throughout the lockdown periods, of course, you expect very few people to be travelling for work in comparison to normal conditions, and many more people taking leisure activities such as pedal cycling and pedestrian use. So all of that needs to be factored in. Moving on to page 61, I'm just draw a little bit of information from the national comparisons that we had made previously in the 2019 and 2020 updates. So in 2019, we were demonstrating that in the 10-year comparison between 2008 and 2017, there had been a 67% increase in the number of people killed and seriously injured reported in Lincolnshire at that time, which was clearly quite concerning. In the latest update, the figure was between 2011 and 2020, and we're actually showing now an overall 8.25% reduction. Now, that's much better represented in the graphs that you'll find in the supplementary data document, but I wanted to highlight it because it means that we're much closer to what we're seeing across the UK as opposed to when we were a bit of an outlier there in the 2019 update. At 3.12 in the report on page 61, I've noted there that in 2020, we saw significant reductions in most of the killed and serious injury categories. And the ones with the highest reductions were children, 0 to 16, which saw a 35% reduction, pedestrians, which saw a 31% reduction, and car and taxi, which saw a 25% reduction. And again, as I've mentioned, that's because of the reduction in journeys were occurring. And I was worried that for the child and pedestrian categories and the pedal cycle casualties, we might have seen a big uptick in 2020 with the lockdowns, but that didn't happen. So that was certainly positive. Now, whilst the overall reduction in KSI casualties has been maintained in 2021, we have seen increases in the two groups that I've just mentioned, the child 0 to 16 with an 87% increase and pedestrians at 19% increase. Now, what I should note is that they've increased back to pre-COVID levels. So it's not concerning in the sense that it's now suddenly a huge jump from where we would have seen under normal circumstances before. But of course, we would have loved to have tried to be able to maintain some of those reductions in 2021 as things have opened up, but that hasn't been the case. We will, of course, be focusing our attention on those groups and trying to ensure that we're providing safety education as much as we possibly can to make a difference. I just want to take a moment to talk about the fatalities that happened in 2021. There was 82% of those fatal casualties were male. 63% of them were in the 25 to 59 age range. And you might say, well, that would be expected because it's the largest range there. But the reason we note that is that, as I've previously outlined, the 17 to 24-year-olds are considered one of our high risk groups, and mature drivers are considered one of the higher risk groups. So the fact that 63% are within that middle range is actually quite positive for us in Lincolnshire. 82% of the fatalities were either a driver or a rider. 92% happened in fine weather without high winds. As I always note when I'm updating the committee, I always expect, despite knowing the statistics every time, that I would think adverse weather would play more of a role in the number of fatal collisions that we have. But at 92%, it's fine, and without high winds, that isn't the case. 67% of our fatalities occurred in 2021 on A and B class roads, and the highest contributory factor defined by the police officers when filling in the Stats 19 data forms was careless, reckless, and in a hurry. And what that indicates to me is not necessarily that it's an intentional act all of the time, but when you look at the key contributory factors that do affect our collisions, there is going to be some form of driver error involved, and so that has to instruct us about how we're going to try and reduce death and injury on the roads. We need to ensure that we're making the roads as safe as possible by engineering out the problems where we can and ensuring that they're as forgiving as possible when collisions do occur. But we also need to spend a lot of time on the educational side of things and trying to make sure people are as safe as they possibly can and they have the right information and tools to make those good decisions whilst they're driving. And finally, we need to ensure that there is a robust enforcement strategy in place so that when people do make mistakes or do intentional acts which are likely to increase risk, that there's a good chance that they're going to get detected for that and something then occurs afterwards, be it education or some sort of punitive element. On page 62, 4.4, I just want to give a little bit of update about some of the work that we're doing, and for those that aren't aware, just update the Road Safety Partnership, who we are and what we do. So at this point in time, the permanent members of the partnership are the Police and Crime Commissioner for Lincolnshire's office, Lincolnshire Police, the County Council, National Highways, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, and the East Midlands Ambulance Service. But as you would probably hope and expect, we do a lot of work with other partners as well, including schools, academies, colleges and universities, road safety organisations and groups, cycling and walking groups, the NHS, company employers and employees, military camps and other motoring organisations and different forms of road users. In 2021, our priorities were young drivers 17 to 24 years old, mature drivers over the age of 60, two-wheel motor vehicle users, pedal cyclists, pedestrians, and those that are using their vehicle for business. On page 63, just a note there at 6.1 that for anybody that wishes to see it, our road safety strategy from 2015 to 25 is available online on the Lincolnshire County Council website, and that outlines our mission statement, our priorities, the outcomes, and the vision that we have, as well as looking at the types of activity and work that we're doing and some volume around that. Just a few key points in terms of what it might be slightly different or updates for this year in terms of our work. We continue on the engineering side to look at approximately 1,000 sites per year where there's either some potential concern or we've seen a slight uptick or a cluster of collisions to see whether there's any remedial action that could be done from an engineering point of view, and we refine that down to approximately 50 in a list every year, which both the Road Safety Partnership and the wider highways will then look at to see if any improvements can be made. On 6.4, I've outlined that we've been working on the Department for Transport Safer Roads Fund scheme on a number of roads in the county, and we're nearing completion on all of the routes that we receive funding for. From an enforcement point of view, we continue to manage the speed camera network within the county. We currently have 7 average speed camera sites, 39 static sites, and between 80 and 100 mobile camera sites, although that number does vary. I'm really pleased to note that within Lincolnshire Police, there's been an increase in the number of officers dedicated to roads policing within the force, as a Tier 1 priority. Road safety is now receiving a lot of attention, and the Road Safety Partnership is working really hard with the roads policing team to try and ensure that we're providing good data so that their enforcement actions are targeted and effective. Just a quick update on Operation Snap, which we brought in at the beginning of 2021. This enables the submission of dashcam video evidence from members of the public in relation to suspected driving offences. Up to the end of November in 2021, bearing in mind we started in February, we received 774 submissions from members of the public, and that had resulted in 236 suspected offences being processed, and an additional 287 warning letters being issued. Now, the thing about the warning letters that I'm really pleased that we've been able to implement is that sometimes when we receive that footage, it may well be that there's some issue with the footage that means that we can't take it forward as evidence that could be used in court if required. But we're still able to send a warning letter to someone to say to them, somebody felt that your driving behaviour on that occasion was of a poor standard, and that we want to raise that with you and let you know that somebody thought that, and that we're trying to improve safety by thinking about our actions. And then people can view that footage should they wish to. And sometimes it's sort of a marginal thing where it's not quite up to the level where we consider an offence has been committed. But again, it's just warning and highlighting to somebody to think about their behaviour. And that's really important for us because it allows us an opportunity to interact and engage with people when we might otherwise not have the opportunity to do so. I just want to also make clear about Operation Snap is that we have a very experienced ex-police sergeant who worked for Lincolnshire Police in roads policing and collision investigation for many years, who views every single video submission that we get, and his job is to look at that as the experienced road policing officer and say, how would I have dealt with that offence if I'd witnessed it at the side of the road? And that's really important for me because I want to ensure that there's a consistent and balanced approach. So regardless of how an offence has occurred or how the evidence has come to the police, that members of the public can feel assured that it's being dealt with in a consistent way. So in terms of the highest volume of offences that we've received so far, we've got a motor vehicle failing to comply with solid white lines, driving a mechanically propelled vehicle on a road without reasonable consideration for others, failing to stop at a stop sign, driving a mechanically propelled vehicle in a public place without due care and attention, and failure to comply with red and green arrows, lane closure, traffic light signals as well. So again, they're all really important offences that I'm pleased that are having action taken against them. The other thing I'll mention is about the Community Speed Watch scheme. I'm really pleased to note that we now have 270 different parishes or members signed up using at least one of the following. So either the passive signs, the yellow ones you might have seen up on lamp columns, vehicle activated speed warning signs, or the volunteer speed monitoring groups. And as of right now, I think we're up to 77 trained groups throughout the county who are actively undertaking speed monitoring themselves. That consists of 914 trained volunteers and 428 locations that activity can occur at throughout the county. And from October 2018 to now, we've issued over 25,000 warning letters to motorists who have been witnessed exceeding the speed limit by those groups. So as you can see, it's allowing communities to make a real difference and hopefully decrease the speeds of vehicles through the places that they live. Onto the rest of the education that we've done, we continue to do our National Driver Offender Retraining Scheme, and due to the pandemic, we've actually delivered more than 30,000 places. Sorry, 30,000 clients have been on an online course in Lincolnshire for re-education following a driving offence. Really pleased to note that we've reintroduced Bike Safe to Lincolnshire after a couple of years of it not being here. We had, I think, 3 full courses in 2021. And we're starting on April the 3rd with a biker breakfast where there could be up to 300 people attending, where we'll be delivering ride outs to people and just providing education to people from at the beginning. And it's a way for us to mark the start of the year when people are going out on their motorcycles and really hopefully start it on a positive safety-based approach. We continue to deliver our Too Fast Too Soon theatre production that the committee are aware of, and we're expanding that more and more into the corporate world as well, trying to target one of the risks that we mentioned at the beginning of this report, which is those who are driving for business, and that's been really well received. We continue to manage the school crossing patrol, and we're working really hard to try and recruit people from the local communities in new ways because of the way that school crossing patrol officers operate, and it being 2 short periods at either end of the school day. It can be very difficult to get people to apply through the website and then be relevant to them in their local communities. So we're starting to use the schools, use local shops such as the Co-op, local Facebook pages to try and make people in the community aware so that we can get people joining up and ensuring that all of our sites are staffed. I think I'm just going to talk a little bit about the impact of coronavirus, which is on page 69. I mentioned that after a long period of delivering purely online courses to people that had committed a motoring offence, we've now started opening back up to people and having some in-person courses throughout the county. That's really important because I think some people either are unwilling or unable to do it electronically, and whilst that has a really important part to play going forwards, there's still a place for people coming in and meeting in a room with trainers and getting their education that way. The community speed watch and school crossing patrols were affected over that period of time, with the various lockdown restrictions, but everything is now back up and running and operating fully as you would expect. Throughout the whole time, the police collision investigation team who are sat in the road safety partnership, the accident investigation and prevention team on the engineering side, and the speed enforcement team were all operating throughout the whole of the pandemic and continue to do so now. I don't intend to go through all of the data and the information in the supplementary data report as well, but of course I'm happy to answer any questions on that. But I hope I've been able to draw out the main parts from both of those reports, and I'm happy to answer those questions now if appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any questions? Councillor Sneath, followed by Councillor Clark.
Thank you. In my division, on many roads, I've got residents saying people are speeding, and I often contact the partnership and ask about cameras because people always say to me, can we have a camera? And I know the understanding, and I understand that we're told that the statistics, accident statistics do not support this in most cases. But actually, it does make you wonder, why don't we have more cameras? And I'm just wondering what the reasons are. If it does slow speeding down, and I'm sometimes told, yes, that there are speeding problems along there, and we'll send the van out doing speed checks. But what is the reason we don't put more speed cameras in? Because there's no doubt they do seem to slow people down, and we also, money is made out of them by people being fined. So just wondering what the reasoning is behind that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sneath. Steve, are you able to answer, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Councillor. So in Lincolnshire, we operate as highlighted by the Department for Transport, and that is that we place the cameras and do the enforcement at locations where there is a history of collisions and speed-related offending. So we've expanded that with some of the mobile operations, and we bring in an element of community concern, as well as looking at a wide range of data. So we look at the collisions, slights, serious and fatalities, and we give different priorities depending on the nature of those collisions and the number of them. And we also look at a wide range of speed related information. So we'll look at the average speed of vehicles travelling through, how many and what percentage are exceeding the limit, by what amount are they exceeding the limit, and then we'll make a judgment as to whether there's a requirement or a need for camera activity to occur. But the primary use comes back to the way in which the government set up the safety camera program, the national safety camera program, and that was to reduce death and injury at locations where speeding had been a problem. So if there have not been collisions, for example, at a location, then obviously we cannot reduce them because they're not there. And there's more than enough locations throughout the county where there's both speeding and a history of collisions. And so we have to prioritise the work that we do and where we're able to send our resources. One thing that has been missing, I think, and I think this is probably comes more to your point, Councillor Sneath, is that where there are incidents of people exceeding the limit and we agree that there is an issue and a problem, but there haven't yet, thankfully, been collisions, that problem still needs dealing with. And I don't think that we've been good enough at that in the past. I think the introduction of the Safer Roads team within Lincolnshire Police, which employs special constables purely to do roads policing activity, was really positive. I think the increase in the number of roads policing officers is also really positive. And I think road safety being dedicated as a tier 1 priority within the force, and therefore more of a focus for neighbourhood policing teams, is also really positive. So I think you can expect a lot more activity in those communities where we do identify problems. And I think it's an area for me to continue exploring and looking at how can we use mobile cameras more in some of those areas where maybe there aren't the collision problems yet, and that's how we want to keep it. And I think finally, to the point about financing, where an offence is detected within Lincolnshire and somebody completes a speed awareness course somewhere in the UK, then a cost recovery fee is given back to Lincolnshire Police, but it's a cost recovery for capturing the offence and processing the offence. And where we deliver a course in Lincolnshire to somebody, again, the money that you get is to cover the costs of the course. Now, if there is a surplus, then that does get used purely within the Road Safety Partnership for all of the activity that I've highlighted today, but you should not expect a huge income to come from that, which could then pay for large swathes of cameras. And what I would say as well is that we do still have some of the active cameras we've currently got in place that are awaiting the upgrade that is required to digital technology as wet film has been phased out. So before we put in new cameras, then we'll probably be upgrading the existing ones that we have as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Dunny.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I found this a very comprehensive report. Thank you for that. It was also made me very aware of the ripple effect of any traffic accident, the cost to the NHS, to the families, police officers' time involved. And I was wondering where you mention on page 65 and 66 your successful communications campaigns highlighting various aspects of road traffic accidents and the causes of them. I'm wondering whether we could have some sort of partnership with, say, Look North, that they were able to use some of your data and information to emphasize to people the problems caused by road traffic accidents. And you mentioned there about speed killing. And I think a lot of people don't comprehend the fact that if you're traveling at 50 miles an hour and you hit a vehicle coming the other way at 50 miles an hour, that 100 miles an hour impact is pretty much likely to be fatal. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, are you there to answer that?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think one of the interesting points that you make there is really relevant to Lincolnshire's roads, and maybe more so than in some other areas where there's maybe more dual carriageways, more motorways, in that most of the collisions that we see occurring throughout the county do happen on rural roads that are national speed limit and don't have any kind of division in the middle of the carriageway. And so, as you've highlighted there, it may not necessarily be excess speed, so in being in over the speed limit, that causes the issue or presents the danger. Sometimes the very nature of having two vehicles that are travelling within the speed limit but are travelling round bends, for example, in very close proximity, can lead to mistakes happening and those collisions occurring. And so that presents quite a difficult problem for us. So when we talk about speed, it isn't always exceeding the speed limit. We do also focus on people driving an appropriate speed for the conditions and for the nature of the road. And so, of course, that is an educational thing that we need to really push hard on. With regards to the comment and using Look North as an example, whilst we can't guarantee what media outlets are going to pick up, we will always endeavour to try and ensure we put together a package of information whenever we do a campaign that will hopefully give all of the different types of media outlets the best chance of picking it up and wanting to run a story with us. And we've had lots of great collaboration over the years with all of the BBC networks, but also the other TV networks and papers and on digital as well, where we'll be looking at something like Drink Drive over Christmas. And it's down to us to be creative and innovative and try and do things that are interesting so that they are picked up by the media. Of course, sometimes there'll be a big event that occurs which might take attention away, but we'll always do our very best to ensure that we get that information out to the public wherever we can.
Thank you for that. I was wondering whether you could use the County Council's magazine snippets throughout the year where you could target various issues on your cyclical programme of typical awareness that at a particular time of the year that's a concern to you.
Yeah, thank you. We've certainly done stuff in the past, but I think that again, really need to focus on trying to make sure that we get this information out through every outlet that is available to us. Clearly, digital, based on the last couple of years, has made a huge difference to the world, and I think people are much more receptive to finding things out that way. But I also think there's a lot to be said for some of the more traditional methods, be that meeting people in public and having conversations with them, or having a piece of paper or magazine or leaflet in your hand as well. So again, it's really important that we get a balance across the different media if we're going to be successful.
Yes, there was someone else just come in the back of my mind. I used to live in Cumbria, and occasionally they would put a smashed up vehicle at the side of the road with a big placard saying "This could be you," which seemed to resonate with quite a few drivers.
Yeah, thank you. There's been a really interesting sort of debate and progression over the years. When I first joined road safety in about 2001, a lot of the media that went out, sort of the adverts that went out and things like that were quite graphic and quite shocking. And I personally found them really impactful. But a lot of research has been done over the years, which maybe indicates that it doesn't get the response that you're after, and that there are maybe other more successful ways in which you can look to change behavior. But I think there's probably a balance to be had, and making people fully understand what those consequences are is an important part of that, especially when you consider for most people they're undertaking journeys every day where nothing negative actually occurs. They don't have a collision. So the challenge for us is, how do you convince those people to take action, preemptive action, to make themselves safer and reduce risk on the basis of something that they haven't witnessed happen to them for a very long time? That is always going to be a challenge, but I think people fully understanding the consequences is quite important. And I know throughout the years in Lincolnshire, particularly within the fire and rescue service, because unfortunately as frontline service they attend collisions and are often one of the first to be there, they have access to those vehicles and have placed them in some of their stations out so that the public can see them, for the very reason that you've highlighted, Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much for your replies.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny, followed by Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start with something, and which is the reality in England. it seems to me is the easiest country probably in Europe or in the world where you can buy a car without having a driver license. This is the only country probably in the world. I can buy any car for £200. I can probably kill, I can crash, I can leave the car and walk away. Nobody knows who I am. And this is the reality we're living in, because a lot of people I met and I talked to, and I'm going to talk about the EU members here coming. Some of them, they don't speak any word of English. They cannot even read, but they're driving a car. And I've seen them driving the opposite ways. One-way traffic, they will go, through it. I seen it. I'm in front of my eyes. A gentleman was on mobility scooter on a zebra crossing, was crushed by the car, and the guy was going to drive away, so we had to stop him. And I seen people driving without probably an insurance. When you talk to them, oh, I insured the car somehow for £200. So all of these things, it makes me wonder, how serious are we to stop this kind of behavior? And I'm going to go here to page 59, the point 3.3, where it states, further, a high number of people migrating to Lincolnshire are of retirement age. But we don't talk about people migrating from other countries to come and work here and have a better life. And this group of people, as I stated, they're not aware of the law. And if they cannot read or speak English, they don't know what the signs are stating. They overspeed. I seen a car at Vauxhall Zafira with 4 people with the yellow vest inside. And he was on the dual carriageway in John Adams Way. And he was in front of me. And he wanted to make a turn to go the other direction. Instead of going through the roundabout, he wanted to make a U-turn. And it was dangerous. It was funny in the meantime. So I beeped him and I started showing him with my hands. He has to go around. And he managed to do that. So for me, it's posing a high risk. And I was talking to other members of the public. And I'll tell you, I would like to see if the county council here in Lincolnshire will start probably a pilot scheme where people, before they start driving, especially if they don't have much knowledge about English or the rules in England, because we drive on the right side, not on the left side as the other European countries, to take a crash course on driving and change their driver license. At least they will have easy steps to how to drive cars in our county. It's not right that we come or anybody comes and buy a car and just like I said, crash a car and leave it by the side of the road and go. That will contribute to the figures of accidents and the amount of fatalities we have in the county. Are we really serious that we can work on these issues? Because it's not right. It's not right at all that somebody who doesn't speak the language, can't read, or driving a car in a different country and doing all of these, probably I will call it misbehaving as a driver, but it poses a serious danger to other members of the public. I mean, we all have families, we have kids, we have wives, we have mothers, we have sisters. They drive the kids to school, they go walking, cycling, and we cannot tackle it. As I said, a crash course, probably a pilot scheme to be used in the county, we may probably minimize our, accidents on the road.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Danny. Steve, could you come back to us on that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Danny. Some really interesting points raised there, and I think whilst you've looked at foreign drivers, in general to present the point, I think it probably breaks down into 2 slightly different categories. Now, number 1, I think, is poor driving, bad driving, people that don't want or care particularly about being safe on the roads, who aren't interested in being safe. And I think the reason that's important is that whilst the drivers that you've highlighted there that behaviour needs to tackle, but I think that's universal across the county, across the UK, in that anyone who's undertaking those sorts of activities needs to know and understand that there is a significant risk that if they do it, that they're going to get caught, because that's what's going to make a difference. And I think that is universal to everybody, and it would include foreign drivers or people who have come and started driving in the UK relatively new. The other area, and I think the one which is really particularly interesting to me, is that the drivers that come here and it's a lack of awareness and maybe don't have the knowledge in the first instance. So people who probably want to drive safely but don't yet have the tools and the information. And I think that's where something like the Road Safety Partnership really needs to spend time focusing on it. Now, we have done things in the past. For example, we created leaflets around drink driving laws, and they were done into, I think it was about 20 different languages, so that all that information was presented. We do lots of road shows and event attendance, again, in the areas where we think some of those issues might be prevalent, because there's a higher number of people migrating into that part of the county. But what I will say unequivocally is that there's more work to be done, that you've highlighted an issue, I think, where we need to pay more attention within the Road Safety Partnership. And I will take away the comments that you've made and really sit down with my management team and think about how we can start to do that.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Talking about children, and I still see in Boston, majority of the kids coming from school, they're not using any protective helmets or anything else. They don't have even lights on the bicycles. They are riding the bicycles with a high speed through small streets, through alleyways, over the bridge, anywhere. And I do believe that you work with schools probably to make them aware that if an accident happens, they're gonna injure themselves badly. So are we still working on that course? Because it's still going on all the time on daily basis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I can confirm that we do undertake that work within schools, both physical training and also providing education through the lessons that we provide. We've also recently converted our newsletter that we send out on a quarterly basis, or a term-based, newsletter, now goes out digitally, and I think 5,500 people accessed that newsletter in the last one we sent out just before Christmas. And again, what we always ensure we do is send out newsletters that are going to be relevant for the pupils and the schools themselves, but also ones that are targeted to the parents of those pupils, which will include the types of information that you've just outlined there, making people aware of the types of reflective clothing that can be beneficial in the winter months, the type of safety equipment that children can use when they're on their bicycles or when they're acting as pedestrians. So I can confirm that work is ongoing, and that we will continue to do that for forever.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, thanks for your very detailed report. I just want to go back to page 59, 3.6, where it says that most collisions are on rural roads, very high proportion East Lindsey. I've already mentioned that my ward is Horncastle and 36 parishes in East Lindsey. It's a large rural district, 700 square miles. We have lots of hotspots in East Lindsey. One particular one is Hall Corner in East Keel. Many collisions there. I'm working with Richard Fennick, Kyra Netto from the Highways team. Councillor Clark has mentioned Look North. Look North were live there just 3 weeks ago, talking to residents, highlighting this hotspot, etc. So I'm trying to do all I can to raise awareness to this hotspot in East Lindsey. What more, Steve, should I do? Can I do? Look North are there. I've got the police doing speed checks on that road, etc. Perhaps we could have more mobile cameras, like Councillor Sneath said. But I really am getting a big influx of emails into my inbox just about this one hotspot. So, Steve, what can I do?
Because I haven't looked into that one specifically before today's meeting, I'll need to go away and find out whether we have already been involved in that process. It may well be that our accident investigation and prevention team have been involved in the conversations with Richard and Kyra, and they will look at whether or not there's a history of collisions that you've highlighted and what the nature of those collisions were and what, if any, engineering intervention would be appropriate. But I will certainly go away from this today. Clearly, I think by raising all of the points that you have to those people, you've done all of the things that I would necessarily expect. And then it's a question of us trying to find the right intervention. Because I don't have the numbers to hand, I'm not sure exactly how many collisions have occurred in that type period or the nature of them or the causation factors. So I can't sort of prejudge what types of intervention we should be looking to put into place. But I can certainly assure you that I'll be going away from here today and finding out through conversation with Richard Fenwick.
If I may just come back, Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for that, Steve, because yeah, engineers are now looking at the camber of the road, etc., etc. But I'm told by engineers, well, no one has died there, Councillor Gray, but there have been so many incidents. The last incident was, I think it was a concrete, a wagon turned over, ploughed into someone's garden. The concrete went into the drains. There was no water for a number of hours. It took out power lines, etc., etc. But I'm still told nobody died, Councillor Gray. But I don't want a death there. There are so many incidents happening on that corner. So if you could look into it, I would be grateful.
Thank you. I think, you know, the way I'll respond to that is in a sort of slightly wider point, because it's a challenge that we always get, and I think it's a reasonable one. And it's very difficult to make the case for what I'm about to say. But of course, as you will understand and know, where there are limited resources, we have to ensure that they're targeted in the most effective way. And so the key measures that we have for that are the number and nature of collisions that have occurred, and also then information about the vehicles, so the number of vehicles, the speeds at which they're operating, etc. And we will, of course, always bring into place information that we receive from members of the public, which, of course, is very often filtered through you councillors who are on the front line listening to those concerns. So sometimes it does mean that whilst there can be a perception, and maybe sometimes there are some limited number of instances that it's not necessary or appropriate to put a big intervention in place. However, what you need to know and what you need confidence, I think, as councillors, is that where a problem is realistic, it's been proven by the data that some type of action will be taken. Now, we don't say people need to die, but we will always look at killed and serious injury collisions as well as the slight collisions. Because it gives us a sense of the nature and the severity of the incidents that are occurring. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's a balance between where we do identify through data that there is an issue and a problem, it needs to have action taken and there needs to be improvements. But we do have to go through a process where we look at the data first before we make a judgment as to what is the most appropriate or necessary intervention.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Brockway.
Hello there. At Appendix A, you've provided plenty of stats. Can you, or are you able to get any conclusions drawn from those stats?
Well, I think the main conclusions that I will have drawn, I've taken from that supplementary document and I've applied them to the main report that was in there. So when we looked at the types of collisions that had been occurring, the primary causes and the types of people that were involved, when we've gone then down onto a lower level and looked at each of the different types of road user, what the data suggests to me, and it doesn't change dramatically in Lincolnshire because the problems that we face in this county when it comes to road safety do remain the same regardless of the amount of work that's done. But it does show me that the key areas that we need to focus on remain consistent, and that is trying to ensure that we focus on motorcycle safety, that we focus on young and new drivers, and that we focus on mature drivers. And the one difference I would say for mature drivers, though, is that it is quite a different issue that we face when compared to some of the other road users, because clearly people within that category are very often very good, very safe drivers. The problem, I think, is that once you get above a certain age, the body cannot absorb the impact of a collision in the same way that you can do as your body is younger, and therefore those collisions, whilst less likely to occur in mature drivers, are likely to be more severe when they do occur. So that's a different problem that we need to try and face and need to tackle. But what the data shows me is that the collisions have been fairly consistent in their number, and the nature of them again remains fairly consistent with the same higher risk priority user groups that we need to continue focusing on.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Brockway.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. This is a really excellent report. I mean, thank you so much for all the detail. I'm going to take this to a parish council tonight. They'll be very pleased to see all this. I just wanted to raise a business of awareness. We do go into some detail about how we help children to understand the road and the safety, but I understand that there is some evidence that children don't become properly spatially aware of the roads until quite late, certainly when they're into the middle of secondary school. So it's not 11 or 12, it's a bit later than that, 13, 14. And they're just not, it's the spatial awareness of the fast moving and the whole environment. And that is a worry, because I don't know how we build on that if it's a developmental thing in the child. Perhaps we need to, it's for us as adults to deal with that, because they really can't. The second thing I wanted to mention and perhaps ask about is the invisibility of pedestrians in certain circumstances. It worried me. I went out on a West Lindsey refuse freighter once only. It was a very interesting day. But I was shocked by the way car drivers totally ignored the men who were moving the bins and just belted round the freighter because they wanted to get past. They could see the freighter, but I don't think they actually saw the men, or if they did, they weren't aware. I'm quite sure they didn't want to hit and see them tumbling down or anything like that, but there was no consciousness that there were men moving slowly across the road, and they just completely ignored them. And that happened throughout the day. It wasn't just one or two. So there are two things there I'm commenting. One is the spatial awareness of children being later in their age than we might naturally think, but also the invisibility of people in certain circumstances. And I don't know how we deal with it. Thank you.
Okay, Steve.
Thank you, Councillor. So not only is there the issue of spatial awareness, there's the issue of risk perception, which again, that part of the brain doesn't fully develop till even later than the risk perception element. And of course, once people do then transition from primary into secondary school, they are much more likely to be unsupervised, and therefore the risk becomes even higher. So the educational provisions that we have do change between the two. So each level of education that we provide in schools is tailored towards the age development of those children, and so they're looking at very different things. So of course we wouldn't be looking at the types of unsupervised activity that's occurring for somebody who's now going to secondary school and trying to teach that to younger people. It's much more about some sort of physical, simple things that they need to do, and how to then help ensure that parents and guardians are able to implement them outside of the school as well. Now, because I don't deliver it on a day-to-day basis, I wouldn't do it justice by going into all of the types of education that is provided and what that content is. But I'm really confident and pleased to know that actually one of the education supervisor who joined us in July last year was a deputy head and a teacher in a primary school himself. And so what he's bringing to it is that he's looking at all of the educational packages that we provide, and not only using the road safety expertise we have at the partnership to make sure it's relevant and right, he's now able to look at that and say, how do we make sure that that is well received by the pupils, because he's used to teaching that level of pupils as well. So trying to come up with new and innovative ways to make sure that information does go in and does have an impact. So I'm sort of really clear that we are focusing on the right types of education at the right time in children, and that we are going to make it better and better as we go forward as well. With regards to the invisibility of pedestrians, and I think that probably points to a wider issue, I think, which they've sought to try and rectify somewhat in the newest version of the highway code that some people might have been aware of from the media in terms of changes that happened in February this year. There's been some, well, I would say it's fair to say there's been quite a lot of misinformation about what the changes in the highway code mean. But in the simplest form, it's a hierarchy of road users. And what it means is that anyone who is of a higher risk than you, it's your responsibility to try and keep them safe and to protect them. So if you're on a pedal cycle, you have a responsibility, a greater responsibility to pedestrians. If you're in a car, you have a greater responsibility to motorcyclists and to pedestrians and to pedal cycles. And what that really does is just bring into place in writing, in that guidance, the common sense that people should be applying when they're using the roads all of the time. You know, people get into their big metal box and feel entirely safe, and I don't think they sometimes recognize and understand the risk of what's going on around them. And so it's really important for us to try and educate people and to try and help them to understand the consequences of if they get it wrong. And the example you use there of people when they're wearing their high-vis tabards, and you're absolutely right, those people aren't going to be trying to intentionally hit people, but they need to recognize and understand that there are people around them that are very vulnerable in comparison to them in their big car, and so that they have to change their actions to prevent the unthinkable from occurring. So that's very much about education, but I think equally it's about effective enforcement. So when we've done the education, if people still undertake that risky behaviour, they need to understand that there's going to be significant consequences if, as is often the case, it goes wrong.
Okay, thank you. I can see no further speakers. So the actions of this committee were invited to consider and comment on the report and highlight any recommendations or further actions required, and also to seek assurance on the work being undertaken by the Road Safety Partnership to reduce the number of people killed and injured on our county roads. I'm going to move that we endorse the report and that we are satisfied with the level of assurance provided by officers, and request that our comments from the debate are taken under consideration by officers making further changes. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This item is on pages 99 to 104 of the agenda pack. The report will be presented by Chiara, the Scrutiny Officer. The actions of the committees were invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. So over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone present. My name is Chiara Cazioano and I'm the designated scrutiny officer for this committee. The purpose of this standing agenda item is to give you a quick forecast and a flavour of what it is to be anticipated in the coming months, and therefore to enable you to consider and comment on the content of scrutiny activity programme throughout the year, and to ensure that that remains focused exactly where it is of greatest benefit. So you are welcome to highlight any additional topics that you would like to see included for consideration in the work programme for the next year now, 2022-2023, as that work programme is currently being developed. I would like to turn your attention to the next meeting on the 19th of April. We have 3 items on the agenda as it stands. First off is the Animal Health and Welfare Enforcement within Trading Standards update, which will come from the Head of Safer Communities and the Trading Standards Manager. Secondly, we have the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service inspection outcomes, and that will be presented by the Chief Fire Officer. And thirdly, we have future supports to volunteers, which has already been mentioned by Lee Serderfield, will be developed and presented in conjunction with Ben Rollett, the Chief Executive for Voluntary Centre Services. And that concludes my update. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Chiara.
Oh, actually, Mr. Chairman, I forgot to add something. Previously, it has been highlighted by members of this committee that an additional item was to come in, which would refer to adult education and community engagement and development. Oh, yes. That topic was to be brought in by the Assistant Director for Growth, Justin Brown, and the Adult Learning and Skills Manager, Thea Croxall. There has been a decision that this item is better fits in the work programme of the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee, and therefore it has already been factored in its work programme for the 12th of July 2022. Members of this committee who would like to engage with this item are very much welcome to observe on this date as the item is presented. And also, we will bring this item to this committee as an information-only item upon its completion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
And
you.
that concludes my update.
Thank you. Any questions on the work programme? Councillor Sneath.
Just a thought on about the Ukraine crisis. Could we be fairly flexible, thinking about if our communities need to engage massively with refugees, that we will be looking at this issue and helping and supporting everybody who wants to work with them? You know, I'm just suggesting that we're flexible enough to bring that in if it becomes an issue for us.
Yes, I'm sure those sentiments are thought by us all, but did you want to come back on that, Chiara?
Thank you very much indeed. Would that therefore be a request for an item around engagement with refugees and any information? Yes, I can liaise with officers, and if it is a report to be submitted to this committee, we'll come back as such. Otherwise, if there's interim information that could facilitate, are you happy with us circulating these? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I'll take that back.
Councillor Lee.
Thanks. I'm pleased you raised that. Actually, I was going to ask if we could have a fairly detailed report as to what we're actually doing for the Ukrainian refugees, who we've consulted with, all of those kinds of things, and an opportunity for us all to ask questions. And I'm sure it'll be a wonderful effort, but it would be nice to have the opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Yes, good point. I'm sure being the community's scrutiny, that comes under us. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Any further questions? Okay. So I think again, I'm going to move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 99 to 104, and the additional items which you just mentioned in your discussion. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you agree, please? Again, that's everyone. Thank you. We now close this part of the committee, but we reopen as the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee. So for the next and final item on today's agenda, we'll be discharging our Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee function in line with Section 19 of the Police and Criminal Justice Act 2006. It is item 8 on the agenda, annual review of Prevent. And this item provides a summary of Prevent activity in Lincolnshire for 2021-2022 and presents intentions for 2022 to 2023 to ensure we remain in line with Prevent as our statutory duty. The report is on pages 105 to 110 of the agenda pack. This report will be presented by Sarah Barry, Head of Safer Communities, with support from Paul Drury, who is the Prevent Officer, 5 teams. The actions of the committee were invited to consider and comment on the report and also share our views of the Council's role in meeting its statutory responsibilities under the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act 2015. So without further ado, over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. You are getting a full scope of my responsibilities of the Safer Community Service today. So can I just thank Claire Newborn, who wrote the report. She's Community Safety Manager in the Safer Community Service. Unfortunately, Claire wasn't able to attend today, but as you said, I've got Paul Drury, the Prevent Officer, with me for any who should be able to answer any detailed questions. I would just like to thank Paul. Paul's been with the County Council since 2015 as our Prevent Officer, but he's taking retirement in the summer. So this is the final report and the final time that this committee will see Paul. So I just want to thank him for his service, because actually, along with colleagues in the police, Lincolnshire is in a really good place under this agenda. I think we've been quoted of punching above our weight in what we do for an area against the counter-terrorism agenda, because we are a low-risk area. But I think with Paul's help, we've got a really sound basis for moving forward with some of the challenges. So just quickly, just bring to your attention some of the points in the report. We still have, and I can't foresee a time when we won't have, a counter-terrorism threat. We've seen some sad incidents of following the Manchester Arena attack, which is a number of years ago now, but the killing of an MP. So it's still around and is impacted by events in this country and across the world. And this report was written before the Ukraine war and crisis. So things like that, COVID, all sorts of things that go on in the world do impact on terrorism and require us to take different counter-terrorism measures. And you know, we mustn't be complacent. There are active threats within Lincolnshire, and an example of that is Ben John, who's currently serving a prison sentence, the white supremacist from Lincoln. He rose to fame as the person who was initially asked to read books by the judge and come back and report. Following an appeal, he is now in prison. I think just as a reminder that Prevent sits within the broader counter-terrorism strategy, which is under the 4 Ps. So Prevent and Pursue are aimed at those who wish or thinking about or about to look at committing the terrorist acts, and then Prepare and Protect are about preparing the communities and potential victims. So there's 2 halves to that, and Prevent is a really key part of that, of trying to prevent offenders going in and being radicalised and committing terrorism. So the report focuses on Lincolnshire County Council's role in under Prevent, and that's about trying to prevent those identifying those early signs of radicalisation and potentially could lead to terrorism. And the duty honours that the Counter-Terrorism Act puts on us is to ensure that we have a really good strategy and an action plan based on a local risk assessment. And that risk assessment is currently just being refreshed, actually, with partners in counter-terrorism policing, and that's come out as a local profile that's been inputted by local authorities, partners, and as ever in Lincolnshire, we do have a really strong partnership, really good involvement from all the agencies you would want to see around the table, from mental health, from other areas of health, from education, higher education, further education. So again, I can really reassure the panel that we do have a good partnership and good buy-in from all partners. There will be a version of the counter-terrorism local profile circulated to committee members following this meeting, and Paul will provide a link to that. The profile has been briefed out to our chief execs of all the local authorities across the county, so they're fully aware of some of the threats that do sit in there. I think the online space, I think we've seen it in other areas of COVID, but that is a particular issue and concern for us. I think COVID caused some isolation and pushed people online, and this is the space that's often exploited now to those who are vulnerable to radicalisation. And a key part of LCC's duty is to run the channel process. So channel is aimed at identifying at an early stage those who are vulnerable to being radicalised. It's a non-criminal space. It is a space that people enter, a process that people enter by consent. It's a voluntary programme. But once adopted onto channel, the individuals who've been identified earlier as potential to open to radicalisation we use our partner resources to engage with those. Some of it's distraction, some of it's an intervention and talking through some of their views, and it's working really well. Again, it is at a lower level than you might see in some other areas, but we use that channel process really well. It's a monthly meeting, again with good partner engagement. A key part of what Paul does is engage with communities, raising awareness of potential threats, potential signs of vulnerability to radicalisation, and to increase our community's resilience to that threat. And you will see some of the details of the work that's gone on across communities, and that is often responding to individual situations, whether it's a group of refugees or asylum seekers coming and being in the county, or other threats that come from outside the county. Another key role that Paul's been doing along with police colleagues is training. So all LCC staff are required to have training in order to recognise extremism and vulnerability. That's on a 5-year cycle, and you can see from the figures within the report there's really good take-up of that, and some of that is down to sort of Paul's enthusiasm and persistence in rolling that training out. We also want to raise the issue amongst young people, and Paul and police colleagues have been doing some of that, but in the future we are going to build that into our Stay Safe programme, which is the multi-agency work we do with police and fire and other partners, and that we roll into schools on the Stay Safe programme. So that's a really sort of exciting approach to the future. So the counter-terrorism local profile did highlight a particular risk around right-wing extremism and right-wing influences, especially on the online space. And often these are targeted at some quite young people. So our education process offer will focus on some of those risks. We already do quite a lot of work on online safety, so it fits in really nicely with that. So that's it on Prevent. I think the other P on Protect, there's currently a government consultation out on Protect duty. So this is likely to be a duty for public bodies and private organisations who own places or buildings where there's a large public footfall and could potentially become a terrorist target. So areas like Lincoln High Street, you know, this all comes off the Manchester Arena attack brought this to the fore. So I think in the future we will be bringing to you a report on both the Prevent duty and the Protect duty on the County Council moving forward. I think that's all I wanted to say, but if you've got any questions, either myself or Paul, I'd be very happy to take them.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, actually, because, you know, it's such an issue in society at the moment. If I could refer to page 109, towards the bottom of the page, the paragraph on young people. And we talk about extreme right-wing influences on school-age children. It's been raised within the county terrorism local profile. I think that's good, but I think we've got to be wary of seeing just right-wing influences. I'd like to raise that we should be careful of any extreme influences. That could be extreme gaming, extreme dedication to any religion, also a dependency on an adult. You have a number of children who have such a need for approval, they can be led in any which way by a charismatic adult, including school teachers. I've seen it happen. Quite a malign influence in one case where children, vulnerable children, adhered to this wonderfully charismatic teacher, and his influence was bad. He didn't hurt the children in any way, but he was introducing ideas that were not really suitable for children of school age. So I just feel that we need to be aware of kind of zealotry in children, a zealot, regardless of their leaning or their political or the religious or any other adherence, tends to be extreme, tends to have less free thought, and in my mind can be dangerous. So while I'm absolutely aware of these extreme right-wing influences, I really think, you know, let's be aware of the word extreme rather than just right-wing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I can answer that, and Paul might want to come in after us. Please be assured we are looking at all extremist ideas, and this is extremism leading to terrorism. So there are other sorts of extreme thought, I guess. But I guess our focus is on the right wing, because what we have seen is that they are using online platforms, whether it be games or sort of YouTube, etc., to influence young people, and it starts off quite innocently and it can escalate quite rapidly. So this isn't the dark web or anything secret squirrel. This is it on mainstream platforms. So we are aware of all sorts of threats, but I think certainly over the last couple of years, what we have seen, and particularly aimed at where we're working with individuals, it is the right-wing extremism space that we're looking at. Paul, is there anything you wanted to add there?
If I can, Councillor, just to reassure you, when we work with young people and right across our communities, we talk about all forms of extremism, and that's what we cover. And we really make that clear that, you know, it's just not looking at one; it's looking at a broad range. And that's why we, you know, when we take this message out, we don't raise fears. We just make people aware that what's actually in real life, if you will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Gray, followed by Councillor Sneath.
Thank you very much, Chairman. On page 108, you mention women's engagement events. I'm glad you're doing that, but there's no mention of how often that they meet. And similarly, on the training side, on page 109, you give a list of going into schools, etc. Do we actually target teachers on their own? Because obviously they're the prime source of observation amongst children. Thank you.
I'll let Paul answer that.
Okay, Councillor, just to make you aware, all of our currently all of our engagement within schools is with the teachers. So when we do our training with teachers, it takes around an hour, and we talk about, again, all forms of extremism, which goes down, you know, it's a two-way discussion with their experience and our experience offering that. The work we're doing around women's engagement is quite wide now. We've put on 3 events prior to COVID. COVID has now allowed us, you know, the regulations are easing, so we're getting back. So we're doing some events at Grantham, Skegness, Stamford, and a families event at RF Waddington. Now that's a first for us, working with the armed forces. So as you can see, we work with town and parish councils, we work with village hall committees. It's really about raising awareness of the work we undertake when we're dealing with Prevent.
Thank you very much for that information.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recently attended a Prevent training session, actually delivered by Paul. It really was an excellent session. He really did make you think. He covered a large range of areas and issues. And as elected members, and Prevent training is very important because we are working with local people in our communities and often in rural communities. So thank you, Paul, because it really did open my eyes.
Can I just come back on that, Chair?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
I think councillors are a really, really massive chance for us to get into the wider communities. You know, our work with councillors, I think, needs to probably be improved and pushed out even further. You know, you are representatives in your own communities, you understand your communities, and, you know, I think working with you more than we actually do now it will be a massive benefit, both for us delivering our work and for the communities which we serve. So thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sneath.
Thank you, Chairman. I was particularly interested in page 108 on the community engagement, particularly the women's engagement events. I know we've mentioned them a few minutes ago. It seems very relevant because it is International Women's Day today. And I think this is such an important issue and just somewhere else that we can be, as women and as councillors, actually using our influence among those we come across. And I'd quite like, and I'd very much like to know a bit more about the events. If it was possible to attend one of them, the Heritage, Faith and Communities event in Skegness particularly. So if I could hear a bit more about them, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Kiara, was you itching to come in there? No. Okay. Paul, are you able to comment on that?
Absolutely. Councillor, what I'm happy to do is share the events that we're putting on, and you're very welcome to do. We found nationally that women, carers, mums, grandmas, nans are a key protective factor within the family environment, and they play a really big role. And that's why we've targeted these women's events. We found them to be positive, interactive, and you'll be more than welcome to attend any of the events we put on, and I'm happy to share the dates as they become available.
Okay, thank you. Just going back to the training, it was an excellent presentation, which you did, Paul, back in January. But just going back to the days when we used to hold face-to-face meetings, we had a guy come from somewhere. I don't know whether it's East Midlands Counter-Terrorism or the Counter-Terrorism Special Operations Unit, but he was really hard-hitting, and seeing him face-to-face, and he was really thought-provoking. I can't remember his name, but would we ever come back to having a face-to-face presentation with such people as that, Sarah?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Chair, we've had an informal briefing with elected members, and we're looking in the summer to put on a face-to-face with our colleagues from EMSU, the East Midlands Special Operations Unit. They'll be delighted to come across and talk to you again, and we'll be more than happy to put on a session for councillors that wish to attend.
Good. There's one guy in particular, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but I say he's really hard hitting. I don't know if you can remember his name.
I think his name's Riz Chothia.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, he's won a national award, by the way, I might add.
Did he? Yeah.
I'm sure some of that should rub off on me, but there you go.
Actually, this is where the double act is definitely split in part, because Riz has moved on as well in the counter-terrorism world. So we are losing Riz and Paul at the same time. Well, Riz has already gone. So, but we are under a recruitment process for Paul's replacement already. We thought it was really important to try and get some overlap between Paul and his successor. So we are carrying out that process, and I look forward to introducing you to a new Prevent officer, Prevent coordinator in the future.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark. Sorry, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I refer to the possible presentation in the summer. Would it be worth considering opening it to all councillors and not just to members of this committee?
I think that would be the case, but could you confirm that, Sarah?
Yes, no, that it will be open to all councillors, and we would hope to do it for district councillors as well as county councillors. But obviously our remit is specific, not specifically, but key to support county councillors. So I guess we'll start there and roll it out further.
Okay, thank you. Can see no further questions, so I'm going to move that we endorse the report and that we are satisfied with the activities that took place in the past year. Further, I request that our comments from the discussion as recorded are taken under consideration for continuing to effectively deliver the Council's statutory duties. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you. Once again, everyone is agreed. Can I just thank you both for your presentation and wish you, Paul, a happy retirement. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Chairman,
Sorry.
before he goes, can I say how disappointed I am that he's retiring? He's not old enough yet. We need him a bit longer.
Thank you, Jackie. Don't you want to come back on that, Paul?
Councillor, if you only knew, I've just had an easy paper round, that's all it is.
Okay, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of the meeting, so that concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for attending and your input. You may now leave the council chamber and exit the Teams link. Thank you very much. Goodbye. That's okay.